I'm Senior Vice President for NIET, the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. And today I have the lovely Dr. Davita Lancelin with me here from NIET. She is the Louisiana Bold TIF Director. And we are so excited to be here with you and to have this opportunity to talk about one of our favorite things, which is really being better together and building collective leadership. So today our session is going to be jam-packed full of things that you can take away and enjoy after our session ends. So what are our objectives for today? Well, you're going to be thinking about and knowing the benefits of building a collaborative culture that supports principals, teacher leaders, teachers, and students. That's so important because you know what? Today we need the benefits of building that type of cooperative kind of environment where we can collaborate and learn and grow together. And in addition to that, we're going to really talk a little bit about building the capacity of school leaders that will result in change practices at all levels. So let's talk about how we're going to get there. A couple of great objectives. All right, our session agenda. You know, one of the things that I always think about is reflection, and the gift of reflection is so important. And so we're going to take a moment in this session to reflect and make some connections. It's like that old adage, when I hear, I forget, when I see, I understand, and when I do, I understand. But when I reflect and have the opportunity to reflect, I truly learn. So we'll be spending a little time getting you to activate your prior knowledge and think a little bit and reflect a little bit about your experiences with leadership. And then we're going to dig into what is collective leadership and talk through why it's so beneficial. In addition to that, Davita is going to spend some time talking to us about some principal leadership connections that we'll make. And we'll actually connect to a tool that NIET now has, our principal standards rubric, and dig into that a little bit and make some connections back to that shared leadership. And we'll talk about how leadership capacity is built. That is so important. And we'll hear from practitioners from the field who will share with us some of their strategies that they've used in order to strengthen capacity in their own districts and schools. I always love it when we get to hear from practitioners who are really doing that work. So we'll bring those to you as well. And then at the end, I'm channeling my friend Teddy Broussard at NIET. We'll talk about some action steps because Teddy always says, so what are we going to do because of the learning we've had? And so we'll have a little commitment to some next steps. So with that, I think we're ready to jump in. Davita?
Sorry. I'd like for you to access your session guide, the very first page of the section guide. We're going to take an activity that comes from John Eckert from his text Leading Together to really reflect and self-assess where we are on our campuses. What I want you to do right now is I want you to think about, which equation below best represents your school's leadership team. So what we have here is as we think about our school leadership team, we see that we may have the administrator as the leader that comprises your full leadership team, or we may even have the administrator plus teacher leaders who equal your school leadership team, or you may even have the administrators plus teacher leaders and students who equal your school leadership teams. So I want you to just kind of think about that right now, and we can use the chat function to kind of identify which one of these equations actually fits best on our campus.
And right now it's important to note that your session handout, your session guide, we're on page 1 of that, if that happens to be in front of you. It was sent to you as a link from L080, and also I believe we put it in the chat box if you need to access it that way.
And as you start to think about these different equations for school leadership, I also want you to kind of think also about, so what might be the impact of these various equations for your school or your district?
And we're already getting some folks thinking about this. We're seeing that some folks are having their administrator and teacher leaders involved in that school leadership division. some people
Yes.
really talking about the administrators in that process with teacher leaders.
So what we're seeing is the majority of you, and I'm seeing a few come up with some student leadership equations also in there. But for the majority of us, I think that we probably, if we don't fall in that first one, the majority of us fall in that second one, because we know that when we have our administrators, teacher leaders, as well as in our instructional coaches, we start to see that as what comprises our school leadership teams. And it's important to note that, the importance of having that school leadership team is because we know that, like the title says, we're better together, that we're in a place now where we can't do this all alone. And that the administrative role can be an isolated one if we don't have someone that can actually share in that leadership role with us.
And Davida, I know on our session guide, there's a place in there as folks are thinking about this to think about maybe some challenges that you faced, in terms of the school leadership, because sometimes, there are some challenges that we face that we think about. And if someone would like to chat out some of that, we would love to hear that as well.
So as we start to really think about and start to dig into that topic of collective leadership and thinking about what is collective leadership, when we think about it, we say that collective leadership is inclusive of, whether it's the administrators individually or collectively, they influence the colleagues, the policymakers, and all those people on their campus around the teaching and learning. We know that when we think about collective leadership, we have to think about the fact that improvement is more, it's about more than just that one person, that individual. Collective means that whole. We're looking at the stakeholders that are on that campus, and that leadership is the work, of that drives the organization's mission. That it's not just individual personalities or roles; it's that whole leadership team that actually helps to move the needle forward. And when you look at that bottom piece and we think about what is collective leadership, it's a guiding coalition of the principal, the assistant principal, teacher leaders who work together to ensure that the school meets their goals. And when we think about that, I would also like to add in, because we talked about that third equation earlier, the fact of actually pushing in that area of student leadership also within that leadership team when we think about collective leadership.
And that collective leadership, it's so powerful whenever, the principal is not alone. And that makes it just so much more cohesive, because you have a group that's really leading the charge together. And let's face it, today in schools, it's a tough situation. We need as much support as we can possibly get.
Yes.
Okay.
So when we think about why collective leadership, the big piece is that one lone instructional leader isn't enough to improve schools. So we know already that as an administrator or principal, you can't be the person that has all of the knowledge. You want to have majority of the knowledge, but a lot of times, it's just too much on one school campus to really be able to kind of digest. So we need to understand that it's important for us to share, and that we have leaders and teachers who can actually help support this goal and share that collective responsibility for student success. That it's not just on you alone, and that when you work together, you can start to build upon those strengths, and then also work on those areas for growth. Because we know also that it's going to be very important that as leaders that we're transparent when we lead the work on our campus, that if there are things that we're unsure of, we know that we can tap into those other teacher leaders or other members of our leadership team to really help us and to help build our capacity around those specific areas. And that shared leadership actually provides opportunities to grow leaders at all levels, and not just at the school level. You can also be at that district level too. And then we also understand that shared leadership fosters that shared leadership development. And that's a big piece there, is that, we want to make sure we have the right people on our team, but we also know that in the areas where we may be lacking, we have people who can help build us up, but we also need to be able to make sure that this is a learning place for all the members of our team to grow.
Absolutely. And so, Davida, as we're thinking about that, at the heart of collective leadership really is capacity building. It's about growing and growing each other. And so we're going to talk a little bit about growing or capacity building of our administrators and our teacher leaders. And so as we're we're at this point, I want to just kind of give you guys an opportunity to think about, so how do you grow leaders at all levels? I want you to think about that for a minute. Maybe chat us a note on some ways that maybe perhaps you and your school or your district are actually focusing in on how to grow each other, how growing leaders is important, and how do you do that at all levels? Give us some of your thoughts. We'd love to hear them, because I know Davida and I both have had experiences in trying to, to build capacity in a team. And that's so important, with all the different situations facing us now. And so go ahead and maybe chat out maybe some ways in which you might have had the opportunity to build the capacity of someone, or to build the capacity of teacher leaders in your school if you're an administrator. All right.
Vicki, I noticed someone put on that during some of the ILT meetings that they intentionally use those meetings to build themselves up and, as leaders centered around their needs. So they use the instructional leadership team meetings as that place. And I'm seeing Heather Tripp says that I think encouraging confidence would be beneficial. So we're talking about, making sure that people start to feel like they have that efficacy, that sense of efficacy, that I can do this. Also, I think Jill Schofield said, I think it's important to allow teachers to provide professional development to their colleagues in order to build capacity. So we're starting to see that we're sharing those roles, not only, that it's not just the leader of the school that's going to build the capacity of teachers, we also have others. And I see also Lindsay Wells says, allowing some teachers to give trainings and workshops. They need to be able to experience that. We're talking about building that pipeline.
And capacity, it's built with intention. It's something that we got to focus on and be very deliberate about, so that everyone has the opportunity to grow through feedback, reflection, and opportunities for improvement.
And I see someone put on, I think it's Leanna, who talked about giving teachers voice, that the voice makes teachers feel, when teachers have a voice in the decision making, they understand the why behind what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, and when you're trying to build human capital, you're also trying to build social capital, because you're having those collaborative opportunities often. Those are important ways that we think about it in order for us all to build professional capital. So it's kind of that cycle of capacity building, Davida, as we think about that.
So, really, just kind of thinking along the lines, many people spoke here about how they're building up their teacher leaders and some of their instructional coaches, because I even see Ms. Tessie White-Stein, she even put up there the fact that they lead PLCs and they build capacity at the school level, and that we know that those teacher leaders are also part of that leadership team at the school. But as we think about those pieces and we really focus, I think in many of the conversations here, we kind of focused a good bit on teacher leaders and building capacity of teachers on our campus. So now I want us to kind of even shift that structure to start thinking about the fact of, so let's consider what are some ways that we help to build the capacity of our principals. So we can think about that. I think that's the question that we have here. We talked a little bit about how principals can build the capacity of teacher leaders and how maybe even our district builds the capacity of teacher leaders. Let's start to think about, so what are some ways that we build the capacity of principals?
And I see that Hugh Wallace was talking about that, of creating that atmosphere of trust and a shared vision, surrounding yourself with competent people. Boy, that's a good one. And delegating responsibility and authority to act, giving that voice, listening and communicating. That's a huge piece. And our principals certainly need that opportunity to have voice in their schools and at the district level as well, to build their capacity.
Yeah, and Vicki, just kind of looking at that statement at the bottom, when we think about learning leadership and being the lead learner, is that we have to get our principals in that role of really being that lead learner on that campus. And so to help build the capacity, it's going to be sometimes contingent upon some people at the district level to also help to support the principal in this role, in addition to really understanding if the principal knows and puts the right people in the right places, they know who are the experts on that team. And so when I see this piece about learning leadership and being that lead learner, it always brings me back to that text by Vivian Robinson about being student-centered leadership, when she identified there are about, five key things that helps the school to move. We talked about establishing goals and expectations, resourcing strategically, really thinking about how we handle those funds, ensuring quality teaching, leading teacher learning and development, and also ensuring an orderly and safe environment. But the funny thing is, and it might not be that funny, but the biggest piece is that the one that they found had the greatest impact on student achievement in the school is when the administrators were leading the teacher learning and development. So they were being that lead learner. They were, in rolling up the sleeves in the field. They were even putting themselves out there, being transparent, but showing that they were a lead learner on their campus.
And Davida, I think about that in that research in particular, where it was almost double the impact.
Yes.
That particular component had. I was like, wow, that is so amazing, because really, but when you think about it, it's about rolling your sleeves up, like you said, and learning alongside. And in today's world, when the content is so deep and there's so many things that as leaders that we are responsible for, we need to build our understanding by going shoulder to shoulder with our teachers and learning side by side in those professional learning communities and in those other opportunities as well. It's a lot.
And in the ever-changing world of education, when we start to think about as new positions arise and we move in and out of those positions, whether, in leadership, we also have to make sure that we're building that quality pipeline so that we have the right people to step up into the role so that we don't miss a step when we have those highly effective leaders leaving our districts.
Yeah, so lead learners, that's important.
So it's important for us to kind of think about some of these statements here is that, one, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. It's kind of like that adage that they say, when we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, you're going to get the same results. And so we know that, as education is an ever-changing field, we know that we have to be change agents and we have to be accepting of that change. And that before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. And so it's understanding what are my areas of strength and what are my areas for growth. And then knowing that I need to kind of seek out and find avenues to build myself up, because when you become a leader, success is going to be all about growing others. And so you want to make sure that you have the capacity and the wherewithal to be able to grow others and understand how to get people to start to think and self-reflect. And when we look at the next piece, a leader also takes people where they want to go. Okay, so that's one thing that's and that's usually like the easy way to kind of think about it, because where you want to go. I want to move forward. I want to increase student achievement on my campus. But when you start to think about a great leader, it becomes a little bit more difficult sometimes, because they take people where they don't necessarily want to go. Yeah, you want to grow. You might not want to, you might have too rigorous. You might think your goal is too rigorous initially, but that's where it ought to be. That's where you ought to be. And so a great leader understands that we can strive for those rigorous goals, but we know that we have a team of people that can really help us to get there.
Absolutely. And, as I think about the great leaders that I've had in my life, I often think about how they push and how they help us to grow and to learn. Yeah. And so I'm going to remind everyone, if they would mind going to mute. Sometimes it's easy to get that little mute button. And Liz, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And so one of the things, as we think about great leaders, we think about, what do we know about principal leadership? Well, we know that the impact of school principals on student achievement is directly connected to the degree in which they participate as a learner with their staff, as Davida was saying, in helping that school move forward. So what are the key actions of lead learners? This is really talking about, so what does that look like? Modeling learning. You go first. You've got to model. I always say, inspect what you expect, and you got to show folks what you expect, right? And so you're that role model. And today, when we go on our virtual little field trip, you're going to hear a principal talk a little bit about that and how they have put themselves out there as a role model for what others can do and should do in a building to grow themselves, that growth mindset. Also shaping the culture. That's really important, because, we often talk about and hear research around the culture of nice, and around, sometimes in schools, we get that to that place where maybe folks don't really kind of share those, maybe some of that critical feedback that perhaps would really increase student achievement and increase teacher proficiency. But that lead learner, that principal, has to kind of model what that looks and sounds like through evaluations, through the feedback that they give, through those walkthroughs, all of those pieces, through really engaging with folks on a level that's honest and sincere, and really modeling that to shape that culture so that folks are receptive of feedback when they receive it, to having that welcoming presence. All of those things that really do shape a culture is really important for our principals. What else do we know? Well, we know that really focusing on increasing student achievement and watching what kids are doing. The principal sets the stage for that and starts to not only model it, but live it, so that we're looking for evidence of learning. It isn't just about, did I teach it or did I not teach it? It's about, did kids understand it? How do I measure quality? Through impact. A principal models that through their daily walk in the classroom with students and with teachers, putting kids first. And of course, capacity building. You know, that is one of the key actions of lead learners, as we've been saying, is focusing on building the capacity of themselves and of others. Did you have something to add there?
Yes, when I think about shaping that culture, I kind of go back to the fact of when we start to think about do as I say, not as I do. That's not the way we want to do it. We want to make sure that as leaders, what we're doing is we're showing what it is that we want to see happening on the campus. So when we see a leader taking on that role as a lead learner, what happens is that people are more willing to actually follow you and to actually decide that this is a place that they want to be. We talk a lot about in many of our trainings at NIET about building that collective teacher efficacy, where teachers really truly understand that they impact student learning and student achievement outside of all these other factors. But in order for us to have that belief system where teachers really feel efficacious, then we know that we have to build that culture on our campuses.
Such a good point. And I think about even Davida, Miss Landry, and some of those things you used to share with me about your former principal, and how she was a role model for you and for others on your campus. Just giving her a big woohoo shout out.
So look, she's gonna get excited. If anybody's from Iberia Parish, make sure you let her know that Vicki gave her a shout out. But as we kind of think about this, really looking at the fact of capacity building at NIET, we have what we call our NIET Principal Standards Rubric, and capacity building is one of our domains. And in that piece, we look at the fact of we have some actual indicators, and this one right here is about leadership development, which is what we're talking about today. Really building that collective leadership and thinking about how do we build our other leaders on our school leadership team. What I want you to do is I want you to kind of look at this indicator here of leadership development, and tell me, and start to think about what are some things that stand out to you. And you may want to kind of put it up in the chat function. So just in this one indicator here, what are some pieces that kind of stand out to you when you really think about principals and their leadership skills?
And for those of you who have your handout and are able to access it, you do have a handout on that. So if you wanted to, one of those old school kind of people like I am, I like to touch it, feel it, and write on it. So you can certainly use that as well.
I know.
Go ahead, Dee.
No, you go ahead, Dee.
No, I was just saying that I just love to hear thoughts around this particular indicator. It's one of my favorite ones to dig into with principals and principal leadership and building capacity. Go ahead.
I see Esther, I think is Zimmels. She said provides opportunities, provides support. So that word provide, and I think we also talk about that word opportunity. That's a big piece right there, is that we have to have these things in place, or at least, just maybe a space and a time for them to possibly happen. So if we don't even provide the opportunity for that growth, we know that we're going to be missing the boat. And I see Tamara Whittington said something about support and collaboration. That's some pieces that kind of really stand out here. And we even see, we talk about that lead learner, and even delegating the responsibilities to other leaders and giving them the opportunity to help and lead. And so when you start to see those pieces here, is that we're talking about developing the skills of, the members of your team, your leadership team. And somebody says uses data. That's Danielle Hooter. It uses data, provides support, develops, and provides opportunities. So we know that these are some big pieces here when we talk about leadership development. So when we think about about principals and their actions, these are some things that they should be engaging in. But if we want to go just a little bit deeper, so just looking at these actions right here, how might some of these actions of highly effective principals positively impact teacher growth, student learning, and school improvement? So if we do these things, how is that going to impact one of those three metrics, whether it's teacher growth, student learning, or school improvement? If you don't mind chatting a little bit there too for us.
And Davida, I noticed that Jacqueline put up utilizing both student data and observations to provide support.
Mm-hmm.
It's both of those pieces that come together, to kind of give you that area to help to build the capacity of someone. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have to make sure that in the end that we're measuring student outcomes, because sometimes we have to understand that we may have to change some of our practices to get the results that we need.
Yeah, and I see there that Tamara Whittington put up that it's buy-in from both students and teachers is critical. Very much so. Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
And then we're seeing some pieces that say about the leader doing things that keeps an active pulse on the building. So you have to know what's going on your campus. You may not be the person that's doing everything, but at least understanding and knowing the practices and the processes that are happening on your campus.
Mm-hmm. And it builds confidence in staff members. It does. It always does. It builds that confidence that I can do. And that's important for all of us to have that confidence in moving forward.
And so, as we think about these actions, I mean, we understand that these are some actions that are going to actually help to grow, whether it's teachers or students, on our campuses. We need to think about now, so how do these actions connect to your daily practices? Now, you don't have to tell on yourself, but I mean, if you'd like to, what are some things that you currently engage in that actually supports what we're saying here as far as leadership development? What are some actions that you currently engage in?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear that. I always enjoy learning from everyone as I go out and around. So this is exciting to see some of the things that you're thinking about right now. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
And I see that we have Janika Gaines from St. John the Baptist Parish, and she put up here something about highly effective principals also elevate the practice of continuing to support teacher leaders as well. And so we know that many of the principals take that go first mentality, or even understanding that, hey, I'm trying to figure out what this looks like as a team. Maybe I'm going to go and do it too. And so that's that lead learner aspect mentality. Side-by-side coaching in the classroom, we see some of that happening, that side-by-side coaching, some whisper coaching, making sure that we're helping in that planning and development, even thinking about the coaching that happens in our professional learning communities.
Yeah, and allowing teachers that are specialized in specific grade and content to lead their peers and own that structure. That is so powerful. That is something that is motivating, it's exciting, and it just builds the whole teaching and learning community. I love that. Thank you for that. And someone is talking here about that they just completed a year-long administrative internship, and it was very hands-on. Having that opportunity to have that hands-on experience is super helpful as well. So, guys, as you continue to think about this, principals really, we can't do this alone. Right? We have to be lead learners. We have to encourage each other. We have to give others opportunities to lead in the school and really push ourselves and push our efforts. But that is tough, and as you think about it, it takes district leader support as well as that on-site school support of embracing teacher leaders and teachers to help us learn together. It sometimes takes more. And our district leaders can get involved with us here and support us. And so we're going to hear from a district leader. And actually, this is Superintendent Keisha Netterville from East Feliciana that we're going to hear a little bit from and hear her thoughts on some things in terms of how she is very intentionally building the capacity of principals in her district. And I want you to make sure that you listen carefully as the superintendent talks a little bit about how she's going to know if she's doing an effective job in building her principles. What are some of those signs? That's always an important thing to look for. Like, how am I going to know as a district leader when this is successful for my principals? What are some of the signs that perhaps I can look for? And the superintendent's going to talk a little bit. You might hear her say DLT. She's talking about her district leadership team, and she's going to share a little bit about that and her collaborative approach there. And she'll talk a little bit about clusters, our professional learning communities. She'll mention that around that for our principals. Just want to get those little acronyms out there so that we'll know when we get there. So make sure you pay close attention. You have a handout in your session guide. There's a little note-taking area there. And as you think about that, you might want to take a couple of notes. But basically, how does this district leader build the capacity of her principals? You're thinking about that. And you're also thinking about what might be some additional ways maybe that the superintendent doesn't mention in this little clip that you can build the capacity of principals. Davida, let's roll that tape.
I think we made the change to support principals because of the need to increase student achievement, also the need to increase teacher effectiveness. That was something that we were pushing as a district, but we realized that there were some things that we needed to do to make sure that principals were equipped to increase capacity on their campuses and also increase student achievement. So we restructured our principal PLCs. We made sure that they were focused on instruction, student achievement, and teacher effectiveness. After implementing a Tier 1 curriculum, we made sure that that was the basis of our teaching and learning with principals. We also made sure that principals were equipped to share that information with their school-based leadership teams in a more effective way. So we structured our principal PLCs around the data, around the need, and then around how we were going to deliver that to teachers, and then how we were going to then make sure that students, that transferred to students, and they mastered those objectives. As a district, we developed our signature goals, which were focused on data-driven results, instructionally focused accountability, and just making sure that principals had the tools necessary to make sure that they could deliver that to their teams. I think a big piece of it was not just giving them things that were meaningless. We wanted to give them something that was meaningful, things of purpose, and things focused on the children, which are the priority. As a district leadership team, we look back at our signature goals to make sure that we are focusing on one of the three within our principal PLCs. We meet as a district leadership team, and we figure out what that meeting is going to encompass and the steps that it's going to take to get them there. We structure our principal PLCs like leadership team or cluster meetings. We have a need, we have new learning, we have a portion where they develop something and they then take it back and apply it at their school levels. It's evaluated when we visit the schools via curriculum walkthroughs, where we actually go into teachers' classrooms to see if what principals are developing in those PLCs is actually transferring to cluster and into the classroom ultimately. Our executive master teacher does a great job with supporting principals as leaders as well as master teachers. She develops these consultation meetings where she goes and asks specific questions, and it's kind of based or tailored on the needs of the principal. Some of our principals are veterans and they've been accustomed to these practices for some time now. However, there are some novice leaders amongst the group, and we just want to make sure that our support is not a one-size-fits-all. It's support that is tailored to the needs, as I said, of the leader and his or her areas of expertise. We want to see three things shift. Number one, we want to see a leader that is competent and confident to lead a school in order to share his or her vision with the staff and students alike. And you'll see a shift in people owning that vision and putting it or helping to put it into practice. I think that's the first thing. The next thing you'll see are teachers that are more effective in their practices. You'll see teachers that are teaching toward certain goals. They have long and short-term goals that they want to achieve, and they make sure that whatever they're doing in the classroom suits those goals. And then finally, the last piece, the most important piece, is we see students that are achieving and growing academically. I think that's the most rewarding part of our work, and we know that it's not in vain if we see students excelling, being more engaged in the work, being more comfortable to answer those extended responses or solving problems that they couldn't tackle before. We know that our work isn't in vain.
Okay. All right. So as Davita's kind of maneuvering things, she's awesome at that. I much appreciated, Dee. I want you to take an opportunity just to jot down some thoughts around this. How does the district leader build the capacity of principals? Think about that and chat out with us. We'd love to hear maybe some thoughts, something that struck you, something you noticed, and then perhaps even some additional ways that district leaders might build the capacity of principals. Give you just a moment. Go ahead, Dee.
Vicki, just to kind of extend some pieces there, I've had the opportunity to work with Superintendent Netterville over time and really understand that the focus had shifted towards truly building the capacity of their principals. And I know she may have mentioned in this piece there, but they hold quarterly meetings where they actually go in and discuss their interim benchmark data and really talk about how do we look at this data and what do we need to do to make sure that we're moving the needle for kids. And so they build their training, their sessions of professional development for principals the same way that they do for their teachers and their teacher leaders. All right, and I see Tara Reese said something that she heard that the EMT really tailors the feedback and support to the needs of the principal. Yes, that EMT or that district support person actually plays a integral role in the schools, making sure that they're there to see what's happening and always there and responsive to the needs of the principals that are on those campuses. And then I see Tamara Whittington also says our district leaders provide support as well as keeping us abreast of the best practices to impact student achievement. And so what I like to hear here is that the district leaders are taking an active role in the work of building the principals, but knowing that, as the district leaders are taking that role in building up the principals or their school leaders, what they're also doing is building up themselves too to be even stronger district leaders.
Yeah, and that's so important, and I so appreciated the way that they've organized those PLCs, Davida, and with those principals need that opportunity to collaborate and to learn together, just like teachers do. So having those relevant, meaningful activities or opportunities, and then having something to take back makes such an impact to their own leadership teams. It makes a huge difference.
Oh, I like the piece here that, not to say I don't like everything else, but I like this one when they say they allow principals to have that protected time in their schedule to provide that support to staff. And even the fact of whether it's a district having that protected time or even the principals having that protected time. They used to call that like the little sacred cow. They say this is the time, where we don't want too many interruptions. If I put it on my calendar, it's there. Because what happens is that, as principals feel supported, they're going to tend to implement those things that are going to be those best practices for their campus. Same way as with teachers, when they feel supported, they know that they're going to work towards those high expectations of the leader that they're following. Protected time is really a good one.
That is a really good one. I so appreciate that. And oftentimes, I'll ask district leaders, so how are you supporting your principals? What are you doing? And they'll share with me, Davida, sometimes they'll say, well, I'm going to the schools. And I always say, so what are you doing at the schools? Right? Because it's more than just going to the schools. It's those actions, such as what, was spoken about by Superintendent Netterville about having some district leaders actually on site to support the principals with, like you said, learning walks, those types of things, and really just in their daily work. Makes a huge difference.
So as we kind of summarize this area here, with really thinking about the district and supporting of the principals, administrators on campus, we start to see that they're creating and monitoring the school plan that's aligned to their priorities, like those goals that are set. I mean, we don't want to set goals and then sit them on the shelf. We know that we want our school goals to match those goals that are the district. And we also want we want to make sure that our teacher goals are aligned to our school goals so that we can have that set of coherence there. And that, we did speak about this a few minutes ago about those quarterly check-in meetings where, the district leaders and the principals review school interim data to collaborate on next steps. And then there's those on-site visits by the district leaders that, they actually observe, provide feedback, and those opportunities where, they actually use that student work as evidence to support what they consider to be the strengths or the next steps or those areas for growth. And then also building those and strengthening those reflective practices and coaching skills of principals. We know that, that when our our leaders are reflective on their practices. When they reflect on their practices, they tend to grow and move, and and I guess you could say in the positive area. But we also know that when teachers become more self-reflective, they tend to change their practices according to those needs of the kids. And so we want to make sure those things are happening. And then also the learning walks and the walkthrough opportunities. We know those things are those two pieces. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. Sometimes, we say they're different. But when we speak about learning walks, we talk about, those opportunities to go into those classrooms and really learn as a district leadership team, a school leadership team. Sometimes it's helping to build our capacity around the work in addition to teachers. And then when we look at the walkthrough, those opportunities to see is what we're asking for actually occurring in those classrooms, and then even thinking about how do we provide that high quality actual feedback to our teachers. And it's just to let us know that this isn't a complete list, but these are just some things that that district leaders can do to support their principals, but also just thinking about if you just even take this down to another level is what principals can do to help support the teachers and the teacher leaders on their campuses.
It's all about capacity building, and we grow each other. It's about learning and growing together, Davida. And I'm going to tell you, it makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
And here we have just another story from the field. Here we have the superintendent of Somerset Independent School District, one of our partner districts close to that area of San Antonio. We have Saul Hinojosa, and what he says is that they've seen some growth in their district over the past few years. Is that teacher leaders have really helped to elevate the progress. And so if you don't have teacher leaders on your campus, you might want to get you some, because just in the last few years, our campuses have met those their academic standards, and we are making some dramatic improvements. It couldn't be done without those teacher leaders on our campus, and integrating those teacher leaders into the campus works, and it's proof in the results. Because what happens is that what we understand is that the teacher is the closest person to the students. And so when we think about other teachers helping to build our capacity, we know that they have been in this job too. They're in this role too. They're in the trenches just like us. And so that's why it's so important to have, teacher leaders who are teaching, those classes, so that they can provide the best high quality support to our teachers on the ground.
And that's really important. I mean, you think about that, I always say, you've read things where they call teacher leaders the sleeping giants, because they can make such an impact. And, Tessie Stein is chatting right now. Love the learning walks, gives us those opportunities, those PD opportunities to learn together. So right, Tessie, it absolutely does.
Yes.
And, when you bring in the teacher leaders and you bring in district leaders and you do those things together as part of a routine practice, it truly will give you insights, especially in this new virtual space that we're in, where a lot of schools are going to virtual, and that's instruction that looks really different, in some aspects. So it's a good thing to kind of learn together and create that awareness together. And so, Davida, as we kind of transition here, thinking about our principals, and thinking about how effective principals build the capacity of teacher leaders. Because just like we say, it's one level, it's building all the way throughout, all educators learning together and growing together. And as principals, we have to make sure that we're providing the right amount of support and the right amount of accountability alongside of our teacher leaders, because it's that balance, right? That balance and that growth mindset. So one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to hear from wonderful Fifth Ward Elementary School. Dr. Brandy Vaughn is going to be sharing some of her thoughts here. And when we first play the video, sometimes I know with technology being what it is, I think we're good with this. We've run it a few times, but if the mouth, I always call it that little kind of old time filming kind of thing that happens sometimes in videos. You should be able to hear this very well. Davida and I have really put some time into trying to make sure that this rolls correctly. But if something happens and you're not, we're going to come back at the end and summarize. But I want you to make sure you listen for how, whenever Brandy came to the campus, some things that she needed to do first up, some things that she wanted to do to make sure that her teacher leaders and her teachers were in that idea of not an atmosphere of compliance, but of commitment, and some things she did. And also listen for how she's a role model for her teachers. Pay close attention to that, because it really is that growth mindset that she's sharing. You do have a handout. The handout 3, it's actually in your session guide, and there's a space there for you to be able to write and jot some notes. And it says, how is a principal strengthening the capacity of her teacher leaders? And what are some other ways maybe that Brandy doesn't speak about, that maybe you've seen or experienced, or you've thought about since we started the session, about strengthening the capacity of our teacher leaders? So Davida, I think we're ready to play the video.
Because we were all involved in it. Everybody was more about self. It was like, okay, well, check, I've done this. Check, I've did this on a continuum of like the learning steps, if you will. But then we really weren't looking at the impact enough to see if what we were doing was sustainable or even doable. Because there's this thing now in leadership we have that it's better well done than well said. So we were saying good stuff, but we couldn't actually prove that it was well done. And so to become more of a reflective culture in this school year, we had to just put it all out on the table. We had to just take our feelings and literally throw them out of the door, throw them away, because it wasn't about your feelings. At that point, it was about what is actually being done and how we're going to move this school. Because we had growth, but nobody's happy with staying at the bottom. All right, so with teacher feedback and support, it was too sporadic last year. For example, it would be, I've done your post conference. Go ahead and implement this stuff, and I'll check to see if you're doing it. Again, that's an example of that compliance mind frame that we had, more than, well, what happens in between observations. It was too about what I am doing to say, yes, check, I did all of my observations, I did them on time, look at me. Or it was mostly, I got all of this done on time, I told that teacher what to do, shame on her for not doing it. Or we knew what the problem was, but shame on us for not making sure that they were able to implement what we suggested. So now everybody knows in leadership team meetings, cluster, or whenever, of providing teacher feedback or support. If you tell me what's wrong in that classroom and the teacher don't know, shame on you. So how do we get the teacher to be just as reflective as we are when we're trying to help them get through something that should be changed or could be fixed, without blaming them for not knowing, and walking through with them? And I think where we are now is in between action and refinement, because we're always reflecting on what we're doing and how it impacts students, not just for a compliance check or how teachers have done what we've asked them to do to be in compliance with our expectations. So now we look at it from, what does everybody have to do to make this a success? And when I say everybody, it's from leadership, all members of leadership, teachers, students, parents, whoever. So we make sure that everybody's involved in the change that we've set, or the small things that we've asked to be done in the classroom to change or build the capacity of teachers and impact students. Brand new leadership team, it was like, keep student work. Yeah, it was something that was always said, student work at the forefront. Student work has to be always on the table. But we did that in compliance, but we didn't know how to use it to actually empower change in teachers. So now we would collect student work when we actually do walkthroughs or we give support, but now we look at it and we analyze it in the way that they should, to model for them how they should then be reflective in their practices. And then we get them to reflect about what we saw and why do they think it happened, and what could we do with the curriculum to embark that change. So now it's not just, before you sit down with a teacher, you must have student work in front of you, because anybody could pick up a pack of paper and say, I have student work. As the leader or the person giving the support, what have you done with the student work to model for teachers how they should be actually tracking and analyzing, and then saying this is something that we can do that's granular enough for them to do it and not overwhelm, but also walk that walk with them. Like, for example, a teacher that I reflected with, I went in and one of her levels of support was just coming in doing her concept development in a math lesson. So just in those 30 minutes, it was scripting what was happening and then getting down on the level of with students to see why they're writing what they're writing. And when we came back to the conversation, I had taken the student work from that lesson, even though I saw just that 30 minutes, developed a plan for action with her student work that she could actually follow through. Now, the plan was literally her post-conference plan with minor tweaks. So she was able to say, okay, it's doable. So now when we sit down together, having that student work in front of her, she knew I was invested in what she was doing because, one, I sat through her concept development, which is when she does most of the teaching. I looked at her student work and I graded it for her. That's always a plus. And then I had themes that what I found. And so we talked about how this could have been a misconception that the students had or the actual breakdown in delivery of instruction. And what can we do differently? And I said we because I'm in her small group next time. So when it's and we call it small group or intervention block, when she has a group, I have a group. And then she said, well, how are you going to know who you're picking? I'm like, well, the student work told me that. And so why do you think? So I got her to be more reflective as to why these kids should sit with me to try this small tweak. And she just came up to the consensus with myself and said, well, if you try this, I think then all those twos out of 1, 2, 3 or medium kids will then be high. So I think that was more impactful than to just sit down with student work in front of you.
And, you know, I get almost a teary watching that. You know, it's like you hear so many things. And Davida, you know, I'm hearing and seeing things come across the chat with folks really talking about, you know, how they love that it's not about just student work. It's not just about a little paper and dropping it in front of folks,
Yes.
right? I'm getting excited, sorry. It's more about using that and in small increments, you know, just going deeper with the things we're already doing. And some folks are, I'm sorry, Davida, I'm too excited. Some folks are some folks are chatting about the fact that, you know, how she's going in and she's sitting alongside and she is that model. She's that model and she might not do it all right, but she's doing it. She's getting in there and she's rolling her sleeves up. Just,
you know, because there's one thing that I do know about her as a principal is that, you know, if it's something that she wants her team to do, she's going to be one to try it first. Because what happens is that she wants to make sure that if there are any kinks or what the expectation should be, you know, let's make sure that, you know, we can identify those from the onset versus when you feel like you're sending everybody to go and do this role and they come back and they say, oh, we have issues. However, you know, I think the big thing is that she's helping to build the capacity of the members of her team at the same time, because they shadow, they follow, they look, they work together, and they do those pieces at this. And while they're doing that, they're also building teacher capacity, because they're also showing the teachers that here we are, we're working and we're learning at the same time. It's not always just a gotcha. And I think that also speaks to the fact of how much they use that student work as a guide, as far as, you know, let's talk about where the strengths are and the next steps, because when we focus on the students, that's I think that's the key ticket. That's the golden ticket.
and you know, I'm seeing some excellent comments. Brandy is from St. John the Baptist Parish. I apologize. I meant to say that. Apologies. But absolutely, some folks are seeing that and then wanting to know, can they see this video again? I just wanted to let folks know, yes, this will play again. These videos are being posted by the department, so you'll have an opportunity to see it on YouTube, and you can share it and see it there, because it is inspirational whenever you see a lead learner going first. I just love that. Getting some other things, involving everyone, excellent leadership, just makes everyone, puts them to ease, right?
Yes. You know, and I think when you look at many of the comments, it's the fact about how it goes back to student work, and somebody said that she keeps the main thing, the main thing. Yes.
Dr. McQueen loves that too. She's got the main thing at NIET. Yes. Absolutely. Totally agreed, Tamara. Totally.
Yes. So, I mean, you know, as we start to think about, you know, just kind of summarizing these pieces, because I think many of you have started to really answer the questions in the chat as the video was going on is that teacher leaders can be supported by principals as they, to gain a deeper understanding of content and instruction. So, just think about it. You have a leadership team that maybe encompasses people from all the varying content areas. And so many math people like to say, oh, I don't know anything about ELA. However, but when we do these learning walks and we go in, we can learn. We may not be able to learn the content as deeply as maybe the person who's teaching it, but we start to understand what those expectations are, what the shifts are. We start to really think about what may be the expectations of the standards. So what you see is that you start to see the needle move because we're starting to grow in our skill set around certain areas, content areas. It also strengthens the facilitation skills, to lead effective PLCs. So by being that lead learner and doing that work first, or even supporting others, you start to identify the needs, but then also you start to identify ways that you can actually address those needs. And it increases instructional practices and student achievement results, of course, because we're focused on the right thing. Like she said, keeping the main thing. When we're focusing on students and we're focusing on students moving, then what happens is that we start to see student results increase because we're focused on the right thing and we're making some of the right decisions. Deepens our understanding of data and student work, enhances our coaching skills. If you notice, that was one of the things that she talked about, is being able to coach that teacher, but then not only that, coming back and being able to actually coach members of your leadership team, because we can't leave them out also, because if they're the ones supporting teachers and they're coaching, you want to make sure that we start to build them up. And also they strengthen their reflection practices. We really like to speak about, the continuum of self-reflection that we start to see, because what we have to understand is that there are varying entry points for the teachers on our campuses. So if there are varying entry points for the teachers on our campus, you best believe there are going to be varying entry points for the principals in our schools. So we really have to start thinking about, where they are on that continuum of self-reflection so that we can have the right types of conversations with the people that we're supporting.
And Davida, just that growth mindset that we have just seen illustrated by a strong principal, it makes me as a teacher leader, as a student, feel comfortable just going and embracing that idea of I'll dive in. I might not do it, exactly perfect, and I'm going to follow my face, but we'll pick each other up. And what a nice way to kind of approach things and be that model, that role model, and vulnerable at the same time. Good stuff.
And so when we think about this quote here, it's a brainy quote, of course. It says, collaboration is like carbonation for fresh ideas. Working together bubbles up ideas you would not have come up with solo, which gets you further faster. So you really think of from Carolyn Goshen. So when you think about it, is that we're better together. Going back to the overall, title and the theme of this session is about that collective leadership, understanding that, when we work together, and we move in the same directions, we can have a greater impact on our students. And so, just really thinking about the fact that when you talk about it collectively, we're collaborating, we're building each other's skill sets, and we're trying to make sure that we grow all the members on our campus.
That's so important, Davida. I mean, we have to grow each other for our children. And so your commitment, as I said, I'm going to channel my friend Teddy Broussard one more time, Dee. I got to channel him one more time and just say, now it's your call to action. So what are you going to do with the things you've learned today, whether you're a district leader, whether you are a principal, whether you are, a teacher leader, a teacher, or maybe even a student? I want you to make a list of maybe some of your next steps. I had a friend, Cheryl Brown, who I absolutely loved, and she used to tell me, if I put it down on paper, I'm going to remember it. And so I'm going to ask you right now just to think about what you can do, some of your next steps to empower educators to create a culture of growth through collaboration. What are some small steps? I always say it's not about the big giant boulders, it's about the tiny pebbles. It might even be a grain of sand. What is that next step for you to move towards that idea of having that collective leadership and really developing that idea of building capacity around collaboration? So take a moment and just jot down maybe something that you think you can do as just a next step to move in that direction. And you have a little spot in your session guide for that. And also, as I'm thinking, Davida, a lot of people will start small with just starting with, if they're a district leader, starting to have conversations with principals and going into the buildings and having those conversations and those learning walks that you referred to. What a positive first step that would be. Or if you're a principal, just doing that with your teachers and your teacher leaders. Have a lot of principals doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So
And sometimes, the thing is when you think about your list and of your next steps, it's always to kind of think about, where would you like to be, and then what is it going to take to get there? And you may want to start, you start small and then you build up, especially if it's going to be something that's going to change the culture of your school.
And so, if you'd like to chat out any of your ideas, sometimes, I say it's a great thing to chat out. If you feel that that's appropriate right now, please do. And as you're doing that, maybe if you have a question or something you'd like to pose in the last few minutes of our session together, I just wanted to remind you, because folks will often ask, so what are some other things that NIET might bring? We do have some free resources available that just really do speak to some of these ideas about leadership that are exceptionally strong, like providing high quality feedback in a virtual learning environment. We have some things on presenting instructional content, some things that'll really help your teachers and teacher leaders, as well as some other leadership kind of pieces. So we encourage you to visit our website and check those free resources out. So any questions from anyone in the group? All right. I think our session's ending now anyway, guys, but if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to us at NIET.org. Dr. Davida Lancelin and myself, we are here for you guys and just appreciate your time today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and the rest of the week.
And thank you for being some active participants, for your active participation. We really appreciate it.